You stand in front of a living map. The continent glows a warm, arterial red. The seas stay cold, steel gray, latticed with the wakes of British hulls. Your finger traces rivers that feed Paris, roads that radiate out like ribs, the thin chalk of coasts that can be shelled but not swallowed. What if that red held, not for a season, for a lifetime? If this is the kind of history you hunger for, ink and iron, treaties and thresholds, subscribe to What If Wars and come closer. You hear, paper breathe. The Banque de France opens its doors in 1800, a clerk wetting a nib, counting rentes beneath a ceiling stained by lamp smoke. Credit becomes spine, not fever. On another desk, the Concordat of 1801 lies flat under a palm, easing the quarrel with altars so soldiers can march without pretending God is an enemy. One quiet year later, the Peace of Amiens lets sea winds soften, docks calm, parchments rustle again instead of sails. It doesn't last, but you feel how it could. Because on a different table in 1804, the Code Civil arrives with the weight of a bound volume, clauses clean as the cut of a new key. Property, marriage, contract. The book makes strangers legible to one another. Law becomes a bridge as strong as any timber. You step onto ice near Austerlitz and hear it crack under boots and artillery. The sun knifes through cloud. Flags snap. You know the hour-tilted maps, that soldiers from Moravia to Marseille told the same story on winter roads. The empire could set a board and move pieces at will. After Austerlitz comes architecture. In 1806, the Confederation of the Rhine turns loose principalities into a design, fewer keys on the ring, easier to turn the lock. The borders stiffen under French handwriting. The stamp ink smells like iron. But you turn your ear south and west and hear a different sound, canvas ripping in hard wind. Trafalgar, 1805. Gun decks smoke, masts fall. You don't need figures to feel the truth. The sea is an English sentence that the continent cannot finish. The Berlin Decree of 1806 and the Milan Decree of 1807 answer with paper. A fist made of law, close the ports, starve the island. The continental system is a customs gate slamming shut. Thud. You feel it in the ribs of a dock worker who smells tallow and wet hemp, but cannot unload the cotton bale he knows a lion loom will want. Sugar turns rare. Coffee goes bitter with chicory. Contraband becomes a new profession. North and east, near the Niemen, you imagine water slicking a raft as two men clasp hands at Tilsit, 1807. The treaties promise an armistice with gravity. The Duchy of Warsaw rises like a torch cupped against wind. In taverns from Poznan to Krakow, hopes whisper in Polish. But you also hear the boots of many armies on long roads, and the winter no one can outflank. You look at the map and see temptation in empty spaces. Too wide, too cold, too far. West and south, another ulcer opens. Spain, 1808. Parish bells. A notary's drawer clicks shut on old forms. Priests carry more than prayer. Insurgents learn the country by smell. A French column sweats through a gorge, naps by a fountain, wakes to powder and stones. The war does not end. It festers under the skin. A king replaced is a wound that remembers its cause every morning. You understand how a village can hate a uniform and greet a ledger with a knife. You turn back to Paris, and the air changes again. Marriage silk rustles in 1810. A Habsburg name, Marie-Louise, stitches two dynasties into one cradle. It is a calculation as much as a vow. Succession made of flesh because succession made of law is not ready yet. The Sénat and the Corps Legislatif can applaud, can draft, but the edifice still leans on one man's presence in a saddle. If he rides too far, the hinges squeal. So, you hold all of it at once. The Code Civil as a hard, portable order. The Banque de France as a quiet pump that keeps blood moving through a vast body. The Concordat as a truce with the heart of villages. The Confederation as a neater map you can administer. The continental system as a gate whose thud keeps echoing long after the first slam. Trafalgar as a truth you cannot sue into silence. Tilsit as a handshake floating on cold water, and Warsaw as an ember in a wind that always shifts. Spain as a stove that never cools. Marie-Louise as a promise in silk. You feel how domination is not a roar, but a rhythm, how it dies when the rhythm breaks. Here is the hinge of our question. What if the rhythm never snapped its sticks? Not by doubling the drums of war, by changing the sheet music. No miracle fleets. No factories built from smoke alone. Just choices that respect the shape of the world and lean into law, money, and distance. You can hear the difference in how the sentence lands. Not win again, but make peace hold on your terms. You picture a red wax seal. The stamp face is warm from a candle. It presses down on a treaty ribbon, then lifts. Clean. You picture a customs gate. Thud. Open for what feeds your mills. Shut to what feeds your enemies. You picture a council table full of maps and chairs for men who are not French, but have learned to think in French law because contracts that read the same from Turin to Hamburg save trouble and save time. You picture a Rome not swallowed but managed, a Munich not humiliated but harmonized, a Warsaw less a pawn than a buffer, with its own taxbook and its own songs. To reach that future, the old fractures must be treated, not simply toured. You already know them. The sea cannot be forced, it must be bargained with. The peninsula cannot be puppeted, it must be bound. The East cannot be swallowed, it must be cooled at the border. The empire cannot trust only bloodlines. It must write down how to keep time when the conductor is absent. The economy cannot starve from pride. It must breathe through corridors even as it clenches its jaw. In the next breaths of this story, you and I will test 3 decisions. They are simple to say, hard to live. Spain without a throne stolen in daylight, but with an alignment written in parish ink and court seals. Russia without a road swallowed by winter, but with a kingdom of Poland, buffered, tax-aware, proud enough to stand between giants. Britain without the fantasy of a broken navy, but with a second Amiens remade, where oceans stay British and the continent stays French, and cotton and sugar move under license so workshops don't go quiet. That is the path away from fever and toward continuity. Not triumph forever, but institutions that outlast voices. The seal, the gate, the table. Hold those 3 images. Feel the wax, the wood, the grain of the map. In part 2, the decisions are made. For now, let the red of the continent keep its slow, living warmth under your hand, and listen to the sea stay cold beyond it. The parish bell in Madrid rings the hour and trembles the glass in a notary's window. You stand by the desk where cords of red and yellow bind a stack of deeds, where a bourbon crest looks down from varnished oak. The door opens, and no one loses a crown. No brother is planted on a throne that does not want him. In this room, the empire learns a softer verb. A line. A clerk sands wet ink. A bishop nods at clauses that seat the concordate spirit inside Castile and Aragon. A minister from Paris reads out guarantees that keep old foros breathing where they do not obstruct the Code Civil's clean lines. You hear the shape of the bargain. Spanish law remains on parish ground. French law governs cross-border trade, customs, and contracts. The uniform no longer treads on the nerve of language. Only corridors get garrisons. Roads from Irun to Vitoria, passes that feed an army's stomach, depots that behave like guests. The rest is police in Spanish coats. The market listens first. Cadiz and Bilbao receive a band of favors, a cut on duties for licensed cargoes, priority for coasters that feed inland mills. Cuban sugar may come under seal. Wool moves out under the same stamp. A customs officer lifts a wooden bar and checks for the embossed eagle paired with a bourbon fleur-de-lis. Thud. The gate comes down on contraband, not on bread. A woman selling olive oil in Seville feels nothing but lighter baskets. A muleteer in Leon still curses distance, not decree. In cathedral shade, a priest explains that sovereignty has not been traded. There is only a treaty that avoids sacrilege by design. The insurgent who would have shouldered a musket stares at a ledger and finds fewer insults to cut his hands on. The war that in your memory became an ulcer now finds no pus to feed on. It does not vanish, it withers. In salons and barracks, the word honor relaxes one notch when the treaty announces that Madrid will raise its own regiments, command them in Spanish, and commit them abroad only by declared vote. Those votes will be nudged, yes, but not mocked. A colonel hears the bell and keeps his epaulets. A village keeps its saint's day and its tongue. You can feel temperature drop. Violent hatred cools to negotiated pride. The corks of wine shipped north carry tax stamps recognizable in Paris. The empire learns to breathe through Spain instead of bleeding on it. Now the room changes. The light turns northern and blue. You smell river water and tar on a raft at Tilsit. The applause is a hush on the banks as two emperors had once promised a lull in thunder. Out of that moment, you pull a different thread. No march on Moscow. No miles of white road chewing boots to bone. Instead, the Duchy of Warsaw is not a prelude but a plan. It deepens and rises into a kingdom of Poland that reads the Code Civil, where contracts cross borders, and reads Polish law, where hearth and parish demand it. Tax autonomy, written, conscription quotas, fixed and finite, Polish officers wearing Polish names on the rolls. A court in Warsaw that does not need to translate itself to be heard. You walk the frontier and see what restraint looks like when it is engineered. Depots on the Vistula and the Bug with roofs that don't leak. Roads laid with stone that thaw without sucking wagons down. Winter calendars respected as if they were treaties themselves. Gendarmes in pairs, not brigades. And no one dreaming of a Christmas in a Kremlin palace. A cold peace with Russia becomes a craft, not a wish. Ambassadors do work that grenadiers once did, letters instead of drums. St. Petersburg hears firmness without the insult of snow in its courtyards. Warsaw hears agency and dignity. Between them, the frost never melts into war. It remains what it is, a warning and a border. In taverns from Poznan to Lublin, you taste steam on potatoes and hear a violin cut quick across a reel. A veteran of 1807 taps the table and says, "The song has changed. There is loyalty here, if you feed it legal bread." The flag in Warsaw shows an eagle again, and that symbol holds a populace in the middle, instead of throwing it to either giant. When recruits sign their names, they do it with a pen, not a bayonet at the wrist. The registry clerk smiles because his books add up. Now, salt wind. The channel rolls its iron tongue. The sea is still a British sentence, and you will not finish it by force. You draft instead a renewal written with harder ink. Call it Amiens remembered, Amiens remade. Britain keeps the oceans, France keeps the continent. This time the paper understands what the last truce did not. Economies are bodies, and you cannot tourniquet a limb for years without losing it. So licensed corridors are cut through the continental system like measured arteries. Cotton bales from India and sugar from the Antilles may pass, under stamped licenses numbered and recorded in Paris, Antwerp, Le Havre, Bordeaux. The stamp bears a ship and a scale. Lloyd's underwriters in London know the mark. French customs know it too. Ships without the seal pay with cargo and time. Ships with it move with an escort of paperwork that even a coastline gendarme respects. You hear commerce unclench. A lion loom answers with thread that doesn't snap. A Rouen dyer stirs a vat and sees the blue he wants, not the brown he's settled for. Prices do not smile, but they stop gnashing their teeth. Coffee smells like coffee again, not chicory bravado. Contraband lives on, of course, because men will always chase margins in the fog and moonlight. But the margin narrows when law supplies a legal path. Insurance rates tell the tale. Warehouses tell the rest. You can walk from a bonded dock to a bonded mill, with your boots picking up dust that means wages instead of ash that means ruin. British pride takes its dividend at sea. French pride takes its dividend on land. Admirals still trace arcs across charts. Prefects still trace rules across provinces. Each recognizes the other domain, without love, but with calculation. Naval stores remain outside the corridor. Powder and shot stay fenced, but cotton and sugar, the blood of workshops, move because both sides prefer wealth to hunger. In committee rooms off Whitehall and in ministries off the Tuileries, men who detest one another's flags agree on tariffs that neither will admit to liking. They sign anyway. Wax warms. Seals kiss paper. Thud. The customs bar drops only where it should. You take 3 breaths and taste how all 3 decisions rhyme. Spain is not humiliated. It is harnessed. Poland is not bait. It is a buffer with a backbone. Britain is not defeated. It is delimited. The empire you touch with your palm does not shout. It hums. Law, not fever. Corridors, not blockades. Borders built to hold in winter as much as in summer. And because you keep the rhythm, you keep the map's red warmth from cooling in patches and flaring in others. What follows is not a miracle. It is management. It is the work of turning victory into order. In the next turn of this story, you will sit with law books and stamps and watch how a continent becomes legible to itself. Customs tables, metric measures, a council where delegates count quotas and do not reach for pistols. But for now, listen to the bell in Madrid fade into the scrape of a notary's drawer. Listen to the Vistula slide under planks in winter sun. Listen to a harbor clerk press a license into a ledger that will travel farther than any ship. The new arc is quieter. That is why it lasts. At a border post near Kehl, you watch a customs beam swing down like a metronome. Thud. The guard's hands are clean. His ledger is cleaner. A wagon from Turin creaks to a halt, and the merchant reaches for what matters most now. Not a coin slip to a corporal, not a family name, but a stamped sheet that lists his cargo in a language a clerk in Hamburg will also understand. The tariff schedule is printed in tight type, columns marching. The seal in red wax shows an eagle paired with scales. A brass weight set clinks on a table. No mystery bushels, no local tales, kilograms you could weigh your breath against. Someone lifts a meter rod and checks a bolt of cloth. The numbers bite true. Law replaces guesswork like a spine slips into a back. You feel the code civil in the room without anyone saying the words. A contract from Lyon arrives with articles that mean the same under a skylight in Milan. Obligation, title, surety. The ink looks identical because the rules are identical. In a commercial court in Genoa, a judge runs his finger down a page and knows precisely which clause he would cite in Frankfurt if the appeal came to him. The book travels better than any army. Clerks trust it. Shopkeepers begin to speak its cadence. A widow in Antwerp can sell a house to a buyer from Mainz without their lawyers inventing a bridge out of air. The bridge already exists. It was printed in 1804, and each reprint makes it stronger. The Continental Customs Union breathes into life without trumpet. It is a sequence of paper, ink, and trained hands. You taste it in cheaper delays, not cheaper pride. Inspectors are schooled to find fraud by pattern, not whim. A bale of cotton that passed at Bordeaux passes again at Paris, at Nancy, at Stuttgart, at Ulm, because the stamp is a covenant now, not a suggestion. Toll houses, once famous for their little tyrannies, begin to look bored. Fewer stops, longer receipts. Wagons arrive before their drivers' tempers fray. A Bavarian brewer learns he can price beer for an audience in Strasbourg without hedging half his week against border caprice. A Piedmontese exporter turns a prayer into a calendar. You enter an office where the day has the quiet authority of lined paper. On the wall, a map pricked with pins marks the new inspection stations. In a drawer rests a thin, shining bar. The meter kept under glass. In Paris has cousins now, carried under escort to prefectures and principal towns. The inspector lifts one copy with careful fingers, the way a priest might lift a relic, and you understand why smuggling is losing its romance. When the distance between Turin and Hamburg is the same in every book and every courtroom, the adventure shrinks. Profit prefers predictability. Follow the paper trail to a hall where the air smells of varnish and coal. The chairs are not gilded, but they matter more than thrones. Delegates from Saxony, Bavaria, the Kingdom of Italy, the Rhineland, Warsaw, and treaty-bound Spain sit at a long table. Some wear uniforms, some black coats, some the frown of men who have never liked Paris. It does not matter. The agenda is printed and the minutes will outlive them. Here is the Continental Council, a diet with teeth and rules. Tariffs first. A wine from Piedmont meets a cloth from Rouen on equal paper. The schedule evens the bite so neither kills the other's wage. Then conscription quotas. Each state's obligation counted in tranches fixed by law, not raids or rage. A levy is voted. Prefects receive sealed orders. The quotas arrive in village squares as lists, not as rumors. Watch a dispute play out. Hamburg wants a lower river toll on the Elbe for iron bars. Baden protests that its roads bear the weight. The clerk reads out a rule about shared maintenance funds. indexed to tonnage, that was drafted last session in Paris. A Polish delegate raises a hand and asks about salt from Wieliczka. Tariffs are nudged, not smashed. No one storms out because the rules let them win something next quarter if they can count better. A Sardinian complains about a dock fee in Genoa. The Milanese nod and trade a vote on rail levies they'll need in 2 years. You hear politics moving at the speed of invoices instead of sabers. Walk out of the hall and into a registry where wax seals sit like cooling coins. The motif returns. Red wax, warm from the candle, pressed until the design bites the ribbon and leaves a memory. The design is duplicated again and again until a peasant in Galicia recognizes it, and a merchant in Cologne does not bother to question it. Seals teach habit. Habit builds power. Now, step into a long, high room where portraits watch the business of continuity. Marie-Louise stands in paint with a child. A law book lies on a table below. The Sénat sits somber. The Corps Legislatif waits for language that will make a throne a mechanism. The Regency is not a romance. It is a schedule. If the Emperor is absent, the Arch-Chancellor convenes a council with ministers and marshals. The Empress presides, and orders carry seals that are valid because the rules say they are, not because a name breathes behind them. Provincial packets include the same protocol. Every prefect receives a sealed volume that tells him who can command what, when, and with how many signatures. Armies can move. They do not have to wait for a horse to bring a man's personal will over a mountain. You can measure the temperature of fear falling in barracks. Officers who once lived by a man's mood now live by pages. You can measure the temperature of greed falling at borders. Guards who once made fortunes on exceptions now make salaries on sameness. You can measure the temperature of anger falling in towns. A notary in Madrid, a trader in Warsaw, a brewer in Munich, a mason in Liège, each sees fewer opportunities for humiliation because the law has replaced the whim that used to find them. Even church bells sound different when the Concordat's peace has been baked into local charters. There is less tension in the ring. Of course, frictions remain. A guild in Milan loves its old ink. A Saxon miller thinks the new metric steals a thumb's worth of flour from his day. A Polish noble resents the quota, but not enough to burn his own barn to make a point. The council takes notes. Revisions come quarterly. The empire's voice softens and its hands harden exactly where they should. At the customs gate, in the courtroom, at the council table. Thud, seal, sign. This is how domination stops being a posture and becomes a habit. You feel it in the even spacing of milestones on a Roman road relayed with modern stone, in the way contracts cross frontiers without raising hackles, in the way a levy arrives with a clear end date and a clear pay. It is not a song you hum once. It is a drum that keeps time. And because the drum keeps time, merchants build, families plan, and men in uniforms learn that glory is a rumor, but logistics is a religion. In the next turn, you will hear the forges and see the canals, watch steam creep into workshops, because the paper invited it, not because a miracle descended. For now, hold the weight of the meter bar in your palm, smell the varnish in the council chamber, and listen to the customs beams settle into its groove. Thud. You wake to prices that have stopped shouting. The market smells like coffee again, not Chicory's brave lie. Cotton bales move with stamps that glint in lamplight. Sugar arrives under paper that looks the same in Bordeaux as it does in Antwerp. Licensed corridors thread through the old blockade like measured arteries. A harbor clerk presses a seal into wax, ship and scale paired, and you hear the change in the way a dock shouts orders. Contraband still prowls the tide, but policy has stolen its breath. When law offers a legal path, romance loses to routine. Insurance men in London nod at the mark. Customs men in Le Havre nod back. The continental system hasn't been scrapped. It has been taught to count. Thud, the gate comes down on powder and pitch. It lifts for cotton and sugar that keep looms warm and kettles sweet. You travel the path those goods take and feel stone underfoot where ruts used to eat axles. Macadam crews bite rock to size and feed it to the road in layers that shed rain. Milestones appear at even intervals, numbers hammered clean. Between the North Sea and the Mediterranean, old ideas become present tense. A canalized sound sliding into the Rhone, lock gates that hold like clenched fists, then open with a sigh, barges low in the water, slow as patience and just as profitable. Along the Rhine, towpaths straighten. In Flanders, a stitchwork of cuts lets barge traffic skip mud seasons that once starved cities of fuel. Arsenal roofs rise at Metz and Strasbourg. Depots stack flour and shot in Lille, Mainz, Verona. You listen to the empire breathe through warehouses rather than through drums. In a workshop off the Rhone, a foreman puts his hand on a shaft that hums. Steam enters the room, not as a miracle, but as procurement. Contracts from the ministry specify output and permit engines where they make sense. The rule is simple. Deliver cloth, deliver boots, deliver cannon tubes, and the Treasury will discount your bills at the Banque de France without grief. Deliver more with fewer hands, because a flywheel keeps time better than a man, and you win next year's quota before your rival can ask why. Jacquard cards flick through a loom in Lyon like a deck that refuses to be marked. Patterns hold because a machine remembers without pride. In Saint-Étienne, boring mills cut gun barrels true. In Rouen, a beam engine drives dying vats that no longer depend on a river's mood. The ministry doesn't write poetry about the future. It writes specifications. You stand in a counting room that smells of oil and paper. A banker turns a bill and reads the endorsement like a rosary. The Banque de France is the quietest machine in the city, discounting notes that carry government orders, smoothing the jolts that used to throw men out of work when a ship was late or a colonel changed his mind. Renti sits steady in desk drawers, income like heartbeat, reassuring in its sameness. A Jewish house in Frankfurt extends credit to a workshop in Strasbourg because the Code Civil clarifies what collateral means. A notary in Mainz drafts the mortgage and knows Paris will recognize it. Money goes where law is legible. People follow. Labor arrives at the desk too. Not as a mob, not as a rumor. As a booklet on a cord, names, wages, term, contracts that courts will enforce in the same language from Turin to Hamburg. Guildmasters grumble and still sign. A prefect explains that a strike can be aired in a hall before it spills into a street, that Sunday rests where the Concordat says it rests, that safety rules in a powder mill are not pleas but orders. The bargain is blunt. Peace on the floor for clarity on the page. Wages may not sing, but they stop breaking. A foreman who once kept order with his fists now keeps it with schedules because inspectors carry pens sharper than his knuckles. You walk the edge where legality meets habit and see small economies bend without breaking. A Catalan cooper planes an oak stave, listens to the barrels ring, and curses a new tax that counts wood by standardized measure. Then he smiles because the tariff table treats his cask the same in Marseille and in Genoa. A merchant can now price his wine before the cart leaves the village. In Warsaw, a customs officer on the bug checks a license against a ledger whose columns agree with Paris. He stamps the page and sends a barge on with minimal theater. He is proud because the eagle on his cap belongs to Warsaw, and the law in his hands belongs to a continent that has finally agreed what the word meter means. In Lyon, the loom sings. A girl feeds cards into the machine and feels the floor vibrate from the engine next door. Her father came up the river after a harvest that didn't pay. He carries no romance for barricades, but a keen respect for warm rooms in winter. He doesn't love the quotas, but he knows when they start and when they end. In Antwerp, a dockside coffeehouse smells like a promise kept. Men argue over tariffs and not over bread. In Lorraine, a foundry glows. In Turin, a silk reeler counts turns, with a watch that now matches the watch in Strasbourg because schedules matter when goods meet trains or barges on time. Costs remain, they always do. Smugglers watch their margins thin and look for darker coves. A priest mutters that steam hums louder than prayer near some factories. A milliner in Milan says the metric cheats her of the inch she liked to steal. A prefect signs a levy and watches a mother fold her hands until the list passes her son's name. A docker curses a corridor license that arrived 2 days late and made him idle. The order hums anyway because habit is heavier than a single complaint, and because councils adjust tables quarterly, not after uprisings. When the customs beam drops in error, an appeal exists that doesn't require a cousin at court. You return to the motif without thinking. Red wax warms and takes the bite of a seal. When it lifts, the memory is clear. The customs bar falls and rises to the rhythm of rules that most can predict. Forges thrum like heart muscle. Roads shed rain. Canals turn distance into a calculation. The sea still belongs to Britain, and you accept that like weather. The land belongs to law, and you enforce that like gravity. Dominance here is not a parade. It is a schedule that keeps being met. Stand on a bridge over the Saône at dusk and count the lanterns moving as slowly as trust. You can almost hear decades tightening into a plane that won't rattle apart in the first crosswind. If you listen harder, beyond the mills and the barges, you can hear the question waiting for its answer in the years ahead. When maps resist change for long enough, what new countries fail to form, and which old ones learn to bend instead of break? In the last stretch of this journey, you will watch borders that history taught you to expect arrive late or arrive differently. Germany slower, Italy braided, Warsaw buffered, Spain bound by paper, not by chains, and you will feel the weight of a duopoly that prefers competition to catastrophe. For now, let the loom sing, the forge glow, the ledger close with a gentle slap, and the road carry a wagon without swallowing it whole. You open a school atlas somewhere in the 1860s, and the red is familiar. It does not scream, it settles. The Confederation of the Rhine has matured into something with more paperwork than pageantry, a German frame managed by tariffs and tribunals, not by parades. Prussia breathes, tall and disciplined, but its appetite is checked by a custom schedule it cannot afford to abandon and garrisons it cannot outmarch without collapsing credit. Frankfurt hosts more congresses than conspiracies. A brewer in Munich prices his beer for Strasbourg and Cologne as if they were neighborhoods. He curses taxes and still thanks the meter for saving him arguments. South of the Alps, Turin's lawyers speak with a practiced calm. The Kingdom of Italy exists, yes. Stitched from Piedmont, Lombardy, Parma, Tuscany, a careful braid that stops short of swallowing Rome. The Concordat's shadow cools tempers and papal streets. A French prefect keeps his voice low when he visits, because the bargain that tamed altars at home treads gently here. Rail lines lace out, not like spears, but like tendons, Genoa to Milan, Milan to Venice, carrying cloth and coal under the same stamped papers you saw in border huts earlier in the century. Italian pride becomes a treaty habit rather than a barricade habit. When a student in Turin denounces Paris in a cafe, the owner shakes his head and points to the tariff table on the wall. The numbers argue back. Eastward, Warsaw has grown into its assignment. The eagle hangs in courtrooms. The code on the shelves is bilingual in the right places. Tax autonomy survives on ledger lines no one dares blur. Conscription quotas are posted early enough that families can bargain with time. A schoolteacher names rivers and writes with equal care. Merchants fold their permits with a satisfaction that has become ordinary, no small victory. On winter mornings, frontier officers on the bug stamp papers without having to invent reasons. On spring evenings, fiddles on the Vistula outlast politics because they no longer have to shout to be heard. St. Petersburg keeps its distance and its dignity. Paris keeps its promises and its dapos. Between them, Poland holds. Spain keeps its treaty and its temper. The Cortes votes on levies that were once imposed by rumor. Priests still bless regiments, but the uniforms bear the same crest that hangs in the notary's office. Cadiz listens to the market as much as to ministers. Bilbao argues tariffs like a chess problem. A muleteer in Leon still curses distance and the price of shoes. He does not curse a foreign king. In Seville, a sugar broker reads corridor licenses like omens, then laughs when the ship actually arrives on the week the license said it would. Insults have grown scarce. Prophets have learned to be punctual. Across the water, London hums in its own key. The city counts and insures. Lloyd's writes lines in steady hands. The Royal Navy throws shadows over map edges where the land turns to salt. Britain is the ocean's grammar. France is the continent's law. They compete like old rivals who have decided not to murder each other at dinner. There are arguments over timber and tallow, over naval stores, and the reach of corridor licenses. There are moments when papers grow frosty and admirals clear throats. But insurance rates do not spike without cause. Customs tables do not crumble because of a speech. In quiet rooms off Whitehall and the Tuileries, men who detest each other's taste in flags keep meeting for the same reason. Merchants keep showing up at dawn. Profit prefers predictability. You feel the duopoly most clearly when a new cut of water shortens old calculations. A French engineer sketches a canal from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and spends his evenings persuading a world that sand can be taught to part. When the first ceremonial drafts pass through, London's charts bristle with annotations, even as Paris polishes speeches. The sea lane belongs to ships. The law of the docks belongs to seals. Arguments bloom like algae and are skimmed off by committees. The empire on land does not learn to sail. It learns to tariff. The empire at sea does not learn to legislate the continent. It learns to license. You watch two powers work around one another like craftsmen at the same bench, reaching for the same tool with different fingers and not drawing knives when their hands touch. There are costs you cannot file into silence. Poles grumble when quotas pinch. Germans sigh when Paris seems slow to apologize. Italians mutter about an identity that arrives in installments. Spaniards remember every clause that felt like a slight. A poet in Heidelberg writes a ferocious pamphlet that sells until a tariff revision steals its teeth. A bishop in Bologna preaches against the pride of machines, and then blesses the canal company because the poor now eat more regular bread. A ship's captain in Liverpool curses corridor licenses on Monday and thanks them on Thursday when a consignment clears under their number. Friction is the price of contact. The miracle is the absence of flame. Colonies whisper at the edge of the map, and you keep them light because this story's weight lives on stone roads and court benches. But even at the periphery you notice a habit. When the center knows how to build councils that last, the outposts borrow the habit and the mail moves faster. When the meter fixes a bolt of cloth in Turin, a clerk in Algiers ends up with a desk that looks suspiciously similar. Not everything should, not everything does. Some places push back and win. Not here, they say, and the center shrugs because it has learned to save its rage for borders that pay. Decades harden what fashion once mocked. Red wax takes the bite of a seal and cools. A customs bar drops and rises on time. A conscription list arrives with the year's harvest calendar printed on the back. A brewer in Munich's grandson still curses taxes and still uses the meter. A girl in Lyon who fed Jacquard cards becomes a woman who owns the loom lease because contracts and courts made that ambition legible. A Warsaw clerk retires with ink on his fingers and a pension he can predict. Men in uniforms get old without having to describe winter roads in Russia. Admirals write memoirs that are more about storms than about glory. You hold the atlas open and run your palm over the page. Forever never meant marble without cracks. It meant habits heavier than the hands that set them in motion. Law persisting when voices change. Tariffs revised without theaters burning. Councils adjourning with next sessions scheduled. Roads shedding rain and taking carts. Ports stamping paper that still means something when it crosses a sea. An order that lasts because enough people prefer its inconveniences to the old chaos. You close the book and the room keeps its temperature. If you want more worlds where institutions, not miracles, hold the hinge, stay with us. Subscribe to What If Wars, and we'll keep opening maps that warm your hand without burning it.